How to charge my Tesla at my rented townhouse. When I bought my Tesla Model Y Premium all-wheel drive last year, I knew I would have to try to figure out a way not become totally reliant on superchargers. After about 6 months of ownership, it came time to resolve that problem once and for good, and being a tenant in a rented townhouse community definitely added to my challenge. Before I even bought my Tesla, I emailed my leasing office to see if the community had any plans to bring EV charging to the neighborhood. I had made myself available to them, as I am familiar with a lot of the solutions out there, and how much of an advantage this could be for the community and attracting new tenants. After months of trying, I bought my Tesla in August anyway, and figured I'd be able to find an answer whether positive or negative and go from there. I hope that this article is able to help the prospective EV buyer, or the current Tesla owner who is living in a rental and does not have a straightforward solution to home charging. My situation will be presented in this article, and I will tell you why I went with the solution I went with, and alternatives, because there is more than one way to do this. My challenge with home charging. In a rental community, apartment complex, or even townhouse row, parking spots are a little complicated. I have assigned parking at my house, and unfortunately, my parking spot is not right in front of my front door. Instead, it is staggered, so my car is parked in front of my neighbor's front door. Initially, I had spoken to my neighbor whose spot is right in front of my front door, and had gotten permission to park in their spot during the day while it is vacant. However, I was not going to be able to upgrade my outlet from a 110V 120V to the typical and suggested 220V to 240V alternative. I knew that this would mean I would need to be in my permanent spot because charging sufficiently, especially in preparation for trips or errands, would require overnight charging. The Tesla mobile connector is 20 feet long, which is sufficient for most applications. Mine, however, required about 30 feet, maybe even a little more, to charge. My options. I had a few options. Use the mobile connector and park in my neighbor's spot and charge when I could. Buy an 8 or 10 gauge extension cord that could handle moving power from the mobile connector to my car, or buy an NACS to NACS extension cord. I didn't really want to do the first option, considering I knew that spot would only be available when my neighbor was not there. It didn't seem like a viable option, and I figured it would be better to figure out something from my personal, permanent parking spot anyway. The 10 gauge extension cord option was what I first considered. It was less expensive than buying an NACS extension, it was more readily available, and it was the first thing my friends who are electricians recommended. However, running this option would have put the mobile connector in the grass or on the ground, and I was not interested in doing that. Running the risk of having that $300 connector that came with the car in the grass and exposing it to dogs, and various other things just did not seem like the best idea. I looked around for some NACS to NACS connectors, and there are a lot of options. Given that this was something that was going to plug into a $50,000 car, I chose to spend the additional money on one that was not from Amazon, and I went with this one from A2Z, which was recommended by other owners, and their reputation seemed more than positive. I was leaning toward this option anyway, because it would keep the mobile connector off the ground, and it gave me an additional 16 feet of length to work with. This was the solution, putting it into action. It was a relatively simple process. Plug the mobile connector into my house, plug the NACS to NACS extension into the mobile connector, plug the NACS extension into the car. It all worked immediately, but there are some things you should know if you are also planning to do this. The first is that you should be very aware that these cables are going to be a target of thieves. I don't have too much of an issue with this in my area, but if you're in a place where copper wiring is heavily sought after, be sure to keep these in a place where they won't be stolen. I put mine away when they're not charging, and at night they're visible from my Ring camera, so I'm not overly concerned. Definitely be aware of it though. Additionally, if you're going to run it across the sidewalk like I am, you're going to want to pick up some sort of cable cover from a local hardware store. I picked up this one from Amazon because it was a little more heavy-duty and it was big enough to cover the thicker gauge of the NACS to NACS extension. I've considered picking up a second one for the visible cable, but I am undecided. So far, I've been able to add some range to my car 3 times using this strategy, and while it is very slow, it is definitely worth it. It's better than it sitting there stagnant. Speed of charging. Tesla says the mobile connector will provide you with between 3 and 5 miles of range per hour when plugged into a typical wall outlet. That is about what I've gotten with it. From 30% to 80%. Be aware that it will take well over 24 hours to charge your car. I plan to cover some additional details on this as time goes on, including any troubleshooting I might have to do, how much my electric bill goes up, and whether or not I run into any issues with my neighbors or my leasing office. Source: reposted and summarized from Joey Klender at teslarati.